blues and reds and forget that there has to be a button. Right. I'm still not sure if this is on or not, but I could be heard. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to invite the three of the speakers to come forward, and we will spend another 10 minutes, for a good 10 minutes, to talk about what we've talked about, right? And the questions to be taken from the floor. We had three different versions of three different things. One was to do with what is happening in craftsmanship and what is happening in craftsmanship of lighting. And then finally, a question of how do we treat heritage through observation. So I would like to open this to the floor. Yes, do you have a question? Yes. Yes, you do.
Thank you. Well, these are wonderful presentations, and actually I'm thinking really quickly because in the case of all three of you, the actual cultural craftsperson or maker, the original person, is not active in what you're doing. For example, the designer doesn't go to the Indian original designer and say, what are the elements you'd like me to, preserve? The artist in the future takes those elements without discussing anything and makes a new creation, which is fantastic. And then I'm getting towards photography because I'm a photographer, but then with the lighting too, you have to, it's all this amazing experience because the artist is no longer there. The artist is gone in cultural heritage science. It seems that the original maker is sort of absent. So with you, I'm really interested in what you did and also your kind of pessimism, because I didn't feel I learned anything about the culture in what I saw. And perhaps it's because they weren't, I don't know what your process was, but if I were involved with the cultural heritage process, I would want to know what my subject wanted preserved. And I would want them to actively participate in the making of these photographs. And maybe that's why you're pessimistic, because it would seem to me with the Orang Lao that there's a whole, there must be a mythological tradition. I mean, they have survived all sorts of obstacles, and it couldn't just be fishing that keeps them together. There's got to be other things in their relationships that I couldn't find in the photographs. So I'm just kind of bringing up, I loved all three presentations. It's not that, but actually what I'm aware of is that we've got this issue in cultural management of who is it for, and what about the original makers? And so in your case, you kept saying, I think you said consumers, the consumers of cultural heritage. But isn't it really, especially with Aboriginals who are so involved with what, they give back to the world and what it means, that I think they're in discussions about culture and appropriation, there's a dialogue with the people, the originators, about what is appropriate to convey. So that's just a quick observation from the minute you.
Meredith, would you like Richard to reply?
I don't actually have a question,
Yes,
do I?
did you have a question? That was interesting. But
oh my gosh, I'm sorry. How do you feel, I guess, David, how do you feel about this? Because I was the most...
Thank you.
I was really responding to the last talk of, wow, so pessimistic, and you really, where were the people in this?
Yeah, with the first project, that I worked within that for about 6 years, and I was part of the community when I started, and I've got probably hundreds of thousands of photographs. But that was just giving a bit of background. Now, the Orang Lao project, I was not able, because it was not my own project, so I had a limited amount of time with which to work with them, and that was always an issue for me. But I do have images that show more of their day-to-day lives, but because that wasn't the point that I wanted to put across, and because of time constraints as well, it's hard to include everything, particularly their spirituality and their belief system. Obviously they have an affinity with drowning, because many of their people are going to go that way, and part of their mythology and part of their whole sort of death rituals is sort of linked to that as well. So there's a limitation of time, and the point that I'm presenting, I think, was part of that.
I guess the whole idea was the provocation, in which case it has worked. I do agree there was an observation from the external that was happening, and I was also wondering, and I don't think it's wrong. I think it was an interesting way of putting things together. Yes.
I really think time is of essence because I led a project team to document our street food heritage. We did it over 3 years. 3 years. So over that 3 years, we had a lot of time. So we could really get into the fabric of every street food vendor, their story. You know, we have love stories, we have story of survival, we have stories of World War, we have all kinds of stuff. But we had time. So we did it over 3 years. And I think I really appreciate this conversation and some of the questions that Richard raised regarding who is heritage for. And this year we are going to be Jubilee year, 50 years, SG50. This is the best time to have this conversation about our identity as a community, our identity, our link to food, and food is big, it's huge in Singapore. We all know that, and how it's our lineage to food, and how that whole narrative of us being, I feel that there's so much information about food, but not enough meaning. And right now, I think the challenge, being Jubilee year, is to create meaning out of all this data, all this stuff that loving food and food directory, where to eat food and stuff like that. It's making meaning out of it. So, yeah.
Right. Thank you. I mean, that's a good observation. I think I'd like to move on to a question that was coming from the floor.
I'm trying to remember my question. First of all, a comment. Thank you all for your really interesting presentations. Very different, but lots of underlying threads. Our photographer would be right there with you. He grapples with imaging every time he points a camera and records heritage, and tries to be as uninvasive as possible, sort of looking over the shoulder to capture as much as he can, but realizes that every time he frames a shot, he's eliminating something else, and that's a conscious decision. And you can't get everything. As I mentioned this morning, how much information is enough? So congratulations for doing what you're doing. That's really important, each and every one of you. The lighting project, superb, absolutely superb. And again, that's a great application of new technologies to bring old heritage into a new light and let people see it in a very, very different way and touch their imagination and wonder, how did the painter, what was the light like when the painter painted this? People don't think about that, but they should. Or maybe they do, but we don't know. My question to you is, you're doing great work. What are you going to do with it now, and how is it going to go forward? Are you going to curate it? Are you going to be the custodian of it? Or has it gone somewhere else out of your hands? How do you manage the work that you create so that it will have a life forward? Because it will get lost. Remember the disappearing digital.
For me, I am moving away from pure photography, and although it remains a part of my practice as an artist who investigates these issues and issues close to this, I'm moving more into researching participation and the way that different cultures respond to propositions of this participation, not particularly in the performance field, which is where it traditionally lies, but more with objects, with things, with situations, and through there I hope to find a a way forward to address some of the issues that I've had with what I've done in the photography field.
Is this on? Okay.
Yeah, your question is very interesting because we are trying to reinterpret the art. It's a very difficult task because it's not my responsibility as lighting designer because this is too much for me. And so this is why, and we say that we need a task of people, specialists for every field, specialists for this specific author or painters, because this is the better way for offer to the visitor of the museum an emotion. It's something that never has been done before, no? Because there is another school for make lighting that is uniformity. So we have a space where we have, and you can see in an objective way the painting around of you, but we are discovering that there is another way. Touch the emotion of the people that is looking something. And this is just the beginning. So I'm very optimistic of this. I'm very happy of this. And there is a lot of... Yeah, we will try to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there a question here? Yes.
Yeah, this is kind of slightly following on from the comment about time, actually. But Ken and I have been discussing a number of the presentations, and there seems to be an anthropological theme coming out quite frequently. And that makes me think, shouldn't we be applying contemporary anthropological techniques? Because sometimes it feels a bit 19th century, the techniques that are being applied, because, we're going in as a kind of developed Western countries and preserving somebody else's heritage, whether they like it or not. And, that's not the way anthropology is studied today. Shouldn't we be thinking about that and looking at that as a discipline? Because we are doing some kind of multimedia ethnography, not even ethnography. It's almost like J.G. Fraser, kind of, coming in as an external and not really getting deeply into the culture.
And who would you like to address this to?
I guess.
Because there are three of them, and
yeah, I guess
it kind of varies.
We're coming back to my English colleague in the sense, but it also applies to the application of fashion as well, and taking traditional techniques in fashion too.
Perhaps Richard, you can start.
Yes, I agree. I think that a lot of the ways, I feel that the way that heritage is documented is still rooted in the 19th century, and I do feel that there needs to be more consideration to an anthropological approach. But I don't have any particular answers as to how that would manifest.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to make a comment about the documentation of the streets in Singapore. Because Singapore is a very progressive place, and deconstruction is always making place for construction. As such, a lot of building has lost its presence, and a lot of streets has vanished. One such example is just before 2006, I broke the news to the Singapore Straits Times. And it's about Einstein's visit to Singapore. Einstein came to Singapore to raise funds. He was brought by this very famous man, Manasseh Meyer, and whereby he wanted to raise funds for University of Jerusalem. And he stayed in a house where many, many years later, I have visited this house when I was very small, very young. And what happened to this house? This majestic house, which stood proudly along Oxley Road, has 14 bedrooms. It looks like a castle. But this house has been demolished, no longer exists. But in 2006, it was the year 200 years of physics. And the news actually came out in Straits Times. And there was a small show in the Singapore Science Center about this man, this famous man, who actually got his Nobel Prize, and released the Einstein theory of relativity 1 week after he left Singapore. My question to the panel is, had this house been preserved in Singapore, what pride has it bring to Singapore? I think this is something which maybe we want to think about it. And has this been documented, may I ask you? Thank you.
This is an interesting question, and unfortunately or fortunately, I'm the only Singaporean sitting in this panel right now. And in the late 1980s, we had this huge problem that suddenly someone declared that most of the shop houses in Chinatown and most probably in Little India will be demolished to make a modern. And that's when the architects put their foot down and said no. And today, if you go see the fact that Chinatown exists today as it is, it's to the fact that there were a few of them and it became bigger and bigger. But if 1987 was 2014 or 15, where internet and the communication was much more better, I'm sure there would have been a lot of national and international level force to reckon with, which we did not have. But wisdom and good thinking prevailed, and we do have an organic Chinatown in India, Little India, right now preserved. So I'm not so sure about what happened to the place that Einstein lived in. There is one house near Marine Parade where we don't even know who lived there. And I know there's something to do with my ancestry, but we do not know who lived there, and we're still trying to find out. So that house now, I think the government has painted and waiting for someone to show up and say, it's my grandfather's or something like that. So I think the turnaround has come, and they could have demolished it. No one claimed it. So I think that's something good going on here, and I hope, sanity will prevail. Right.
This isn't exactly a question. I was just reflecting on the question that Mary Doe and a few other people brought up about the respect for, addressing some of these anthropological problems. I have a colleague who unfortunately couldn't come, who is named Chineriung. He fled Cambodia during the time of Pol Pot, but he was fully educated in the music of Cambodia. He left, went to the U.S., became very successful as a composer. Now he's going back to teach Cambodians the memory that he has. He said that many young people are working with popular music, and but he says that although they may not know so many of their own instruments and traditions, it's a door. And once they are curious, he's able to go open that door wider. And so, I'm wondering if you think perhaps fashion might be similar. Galina.
Yeah, I think it is. And to me, what you mentioned, it's very sentimental to wear something that was touched by human being instead of manufactured somewhere. So anything that has the touch of heritage, something that has meaning and history, something that keeps and preserve all those incredible techniques. I mean, thinking of weaving, the textile, it's our life, it's the meaning of life. We are so connected to that, so I cannot even imagine replacing this technique with something I mean, of course, we are targeting the new technology, but something that is not connected to natural meaning of the material.
Shall I add an example? Maybe this should help for understanding in my field. From our experience in China that started about 10 years ago, I remember that when we was there the first time, the request from the client there was to have a lot of lighting. For lighting a street or a quarter of the city, they request to have color in the light, in an incredible quantity of light. And I and Serena tried to convince them that they have to think to their root, to their origins, and not follow an American model. But at that time, they was convinced that Las Vegas model was the right one. And there is no way to convince them. So they followed this way. And all of us have seen what has been the evolution of the light into the city in China. But I can say also that after 10 years, they are thinking to this concept that we try to explain many times in different universities in China. And then I are thinking that probably they have to find their model to follow and not another one. So this is a good lesson to follow. We have not to forget where we come from, and the same from Singapore. The idea to destroy something that come from the past, that is the story of Singapore. It's an example that must not be followed. No? Yeah.
I think Meridal, we have a new person asking questions, so we should give her a chance. I think we do have to go for dinner at 6, so this would be the last but one. Meridal, not a long one, please, mademoiselle. Okay.
Sure.
Thank
A
you.
very
No,
short
not for
one.
you. I'm just my colleague, so I can.
Sure. All right. I just had a question addressed specifically to Galina and Richard. My question is, okay, when you showed your photographs and your fashion designs, they were very interesting, but they're pretty much like some of the other audience mentioned, modern renditions of a culture which is something that could have been quite different. And my question is, how would something like this go back to the community itself, and how would it be perceived by the community? Because I'm an Indian, and we have this issue where a lot of Indian young people want to, or are influenced by how Westerners, people outside India, perceive their culture. And therefore they say that, okay, this is, they kind of lose their, what you could call the roots of the culture, maybe, because of what they see as other people interpreting them. So how would a different interpretation, which is definitely very interesting, how would that be interpreted by the original community? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Back to the community, to me it's more going back to the custom-made clothing, like the bespoke. I mean, if we speak about fashion, it's not the mass production, but it's one of a kind. So when something was specially made for you, and it's including other people's touch, back to the community, let's say, if it's beading of a gown, like evening gown, or a wedding gown involves 3-4 people, then this gown has incredible meaning instead of being done from a machine and hanging in the store, and there are 20 others. The repeats are exactly the same, so you don't feel the specialty.
I think in my case, the community was aware of what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I was working for a charity that was looking after their well-being and particularly educating their children in things like IT and language. And I had to seek permission from the elder to be there. And so I was working in one respect with the community as opposed to a total outsider, sort of focusing a lens on a kind of human zoo. That's not what I was doing, and that was understood. And those that didn't want to be photographed, and it was only one or two of them, moved away, and that was fine. I'm not paparazzi, so.
No, that was not quite what I know I'm taking a bit of time here. My point was, okay, you had a lot of photos of Orang Laut wearing jeans and, dressing very modern. And what about other communities of Orang Laut when they see that? And we have pressure from our parents, for instance, to say, when you go to a temple, you have to wear a traditional dress. This is an example. And if I would see a photo of somebody else in another community who is doing something religious but not adhering to the religious norms, I might throw it out and say, why do I have to do this when, this photographer has shown that other people don't do it, So is that potentially going to be an issue of this kind of a different interpretation?
I think, if I sort of understand your question correctly, that sometimes we expect to see things. We expect people to behave in the ways we, again, as a consumer, want them to, and that's the sort of cultural colonialism that I have an issue with. I mean, there are probably very many reasons why they're dressed in jeans and t-shirts, and that's tied to economy, where, how they got them, and I think, those issues are very much there, and I think that people stopped wearing in many communities traditional costumes when the tourists were not present quite a long time ago, and we have to allow, I think, that to move on. We have to allow people to wear fabrics that are going to withstand daily wear, daily toil of a hard life, etc. We have to allow people to have smartphones and enormous plasma screens with karaoke machines in their small houses. And all of this stuff, there are reasons and means by which they get them, but people move on and cultures die and get reborn again.
I think, Andreas, we seem to be having discussions going on. I mean, it seems to be nice and good. We can do dinner slightly late. So we don't have much time. Do you have a comment?
I have a lot of comments.
So can we? Yeah, because I would like to, and we'd like to.
We can. I can bring it up tomorrow. I just think that I'm back to Professor Luca, who was talking, and Professor Dr. Zicki. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm back to Professor Luca and Dr. Zicki. I hope I'm saying this right, about certain areas of knowledge that are falling away. And so a lot of this has to do with a lot of these issues have been discussed in the arts for at least 20 or 30 years about cultural appropriation and about anthropology, but I wanted to bring that up because what I'm realizing is with Mr. Morris and Paolo, that they're in a it's not that they're in a Western culture instead of a non-Western culture, it's that they're in their own culture. And so within your own culture, Mr. Morris, you were just as poetic with the Shakespearean students as Paolo is in deciding to bring emotion to the light because you want to find a way to not have those traditions die. So poetics, which is what artists kind of deal with, is permissible. And I want to just tell you, if you look at a lot of work that's all over Singapore about Southeast Asian identity, when people speak about their own identity, there are poetics. And poetics are what move people. And quality of light and all of that.
I think it's a good way to end because just to follow up, I thought I should tell you an anecdote from my life which makes very meaningful statement. A couple of years ago, about 5-6 years ago, I was wearing a traditional South Indian dhoti, which is just a white, and walked out, and there was this guy who told me, "Oh, you're in an Indian costume." I could not stop laughing because This takes me back to 1960 when I would wear these striped, not 1960, 1970s when I would wear these striped pants and go, and my grandfather said, "Oh, you're in the circus costume. Are you the clown? Are you the ringmaster?" So here's the whole culture, to him every day I must wear dhoti, right? And when I'm there, I'm always wearing dhoti. And when I'm wearing the striped flare pant, am I the clown in the circus or am I the ringmaster? So it's a cultural thing. And I think for you, because I'm going through this every day, is to be just natural. I mean, discover yourself, and that is heritage for me. And with that, I'm very thankful for all the people who are here and a lot of discussions that we had. I'm sure you can have discussions over dinner. And I'd like to see you all tomorrow as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.